responding to critiques with theory. So there's a ton of different theory you can read against critiques. In no particular order, here are some shells. One is you can read uh, theory against K's of the resolution that are not specific to your AF. The most popular arguments there are K's of the resolution punish the AF for assumptions that the AF did not decide to uphold. Um, so if the AF recognized the resolution was problematic and decided to shift away from that, the AF is still being punished for that. And given that the AF didn't choose to defend the resolution, it seems to put the AF in a very undesirable position. The next category of Ks that you can read, or theory you can read against Ks, is just like straight up K bad. I don't really recommend this strategy. Critiques are a probably legitimate form of argumentation that definitely should be included in the debate sphere, but people can and do read these shells, so it's worth pointing out that they're an option and that they're something that you could encounter. I think the third category of theory shells you can read against a K is on the alternative. So you can read theory shells saying that you can't have a reject alternative, like you can't just reject the AF. You could read theory shells saying that your alternative needs to be implementable. It needs to be like a policy implementable alternative. You could have theory saying your alternative can't be utopian, or it can't abuse fiat, right? So, for example, if your alternative to a cap K is socialism, and your alternative just fiats that your world will be socialist and doesn't defend the process by which we would reach socialism, then that seems to be unfair. So that would be an example of alternative that doesn't defend the policy action consequences of its text. So presumably, in the process of becoming socialist, there would be a lot of things that happen. Right, there would be a lot of transition, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the economy, in terms of how race relations and class relations work, in terms of like housing, in terms of hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. Right, and so the K should be forced to defend all of those consequences in its adoption of socialism. Um, I think another form of uh, theory against K's is that like K's of omissions bad, like uh, K's that say you didn't do this, thus you should lose bad, because there are presumably an infinite amount of things you could have done that you did not do. I think another form of theory against K's is K's plus other strategies bad. So, like, if you read a K plus theory, you could say you can't read both K and a theory, or you must weigh the K between the theory and explain which pre-fiat issue comes first. Or if you read K and like substantive turns to the AF, right? You could read theory saying like you can't read a critique and then performatively contradict yourself, things like that.
Right.
I think in a lot of those options, like specifically in the theory plus substantive or K plus substantive turns to the AF, the more persuasive way to respond to the K is not with theory, but rather with extending the turns and explaining why the performative contradiction means that they bite harder into their K than you do, and the critique actually becomes a reason they lose, not you. Um, right? Because then there's the argument about added intentionality that you didn't intend to cause the bad things that the that said you caused, but they knew about it since they were making the arguments, and then they still proceeded to link themselves in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's not a comprehensive list of theory you can read against a K, but it's a good first look at the different options you have available to you when you're responding to a K.
Sure.
Now, obviously, when you respond to a K, the most persuasive responses will be K specific. And so the theory is persuasive if it's specific to the K. But I think in general, if you can engage in the link debate or you can engage in the alternative debate, that is almost always more persuasive. So theory should not be your first option against a K. It should definitely be a second, third, or fourth option. The first option should be to substantively beat it. Now, the next thing you need to look at with the K, then, if we're going to read theory against it, is uh, the advantages of responding to a K with theory. The first big advantage is that you can write this debate out and predict what it'll be. So you don't have to use a lot of prep time before the 1AR, and you know for sure that you'll have arguments that work against the K come the 2AR. Like the 2NR cannot just no link out of your responses. Like let's say you read a bunch of cards against the impact. The 2NR that's really good on the K impact will probably demolish you on it. But a 2NR on theory will have to definitely engage the line by line of your theory shell. So this means one big advantage is that you know that the 1AR will matter come the 2AR. Another big advantage is you save yourself prep time for the 2AR because a lot of this debate can be scripted. And another advantage is that a lot of this debate can be frontlined for the 2AR. You can predict the common responses for why K outweighs theory and why K is necessary ground and why K is great education.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I think another advantage of responding to the K with theory is that the theory can sort of impact turn the K.
Yeah.
And so you can make reasons why, if they are theoretically excluding you from the round, that is a worst form of. So it's not impact turn. I guess the more.
Link turn.
Yeah, it's the link turn. So I was completely wrong. An impact turn would say that the bad impacts the K says happens when you vote AF are actually good impacts. Yeah. A link turn would say that the K causes more of those bad impacts than you do.
Mm-hmm.
So if the purpose of the K is to make the debate space more accessible, and you prove that they're making the debate space less accessible by the strategy they undertook, then presumably that would be a link turn. You would still have to compare the sizes of the link, right? But independent of the question of whether theory comes before the K, you could use theory as a turn to the K.
Right.
So another advantage then would be that the theory shell can become dual functional in terms of how it interacts with the K.
Mm-hmm.
It can interact as a parallel impact that can be weighed, and it can also interact as a link turn.
Right.
And the last big advantage to responding to a K with theory is that there is no 3NR. So that means the 2NR needs to be perfect on the theory debate. And the 2NR that doesn't come close to perfect on the theory debate leaves it such that the 2AR can definitely win the theory debate and win the round.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's talk about disadvantages of responding to a K with theory. I think the first and obvious biggest disadvantage of responding to a K with theory is that you're not engaging the K specifically.
Yeah.
You're engaging it at a generic level. Mm-hmm. Judges don't appreciate this. Mm-hmm. It's intellectually a little bit sloppy. And I think it's most certainly perceptually not persuasive.
Uh-huh.
At a certain point, you just seem like you're whining.
Sure.
I think the next big disadvantage of responding to a K with theory is that the 2NR, a good 2NR, a good K debater 2NR especially, will have this debate scripted. So similar to what the 2NR against a pick would look like, a 2NR against the K, on the K versus theory debate will be damning. Mm-hmm. It would be fast, it would be very comprehensive, and it would throw out a lot of different things you'd have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I think the last disadvantage of reading theory against a K is that you sort of do have a nib. You have to not only win the theory shell, but then you have to win that it outweighs the K.
Well, I think that's the part for the K, the person initiating the K too, right? They have a nib. They have to prove that K outweighs, and also.
Well, they don't have to prove K outweighs because they can just beat the theory shell and then win the K.
That's still a nib in there, right? They have to win 2 layers to win. You can't just win in one argument. You can't just win K.
Right, and win the round. I see what you're saying. That is a nib for the neg as well. I think that, yeah, you're right. It is a nib for the neg as well. But it seems like that nib for the neg is less damning because it has 6 minutes in the 2NR to deal with it. And the AF only has 4 minutes or 3 minutes to deal with it, depending on if we're talking about the 1AR or the 2AR.
Sure.
Okay. So what we're going to focus on in this particular session is, let's say you're winning a theory shell. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're winning that the K was unfair or uneducational. Now we're going to compare it to weighing against the K. Mm-hmm. Now, both of these arguments are traditionally considered pre-fiat, in the sense that they are conversations about what happens prior to the resolution being enacted. Uh-huh. So you have to compare these two pre-fiat impacts against each other. The presumed framework for theory is being able to properly adjudicate the winner of the debate.
Not necessarily. It's also education.
Right.
Yeah.
So the presumed framework for fairness then would be able to correctly determine the better debater.
Right.
The presumed framework for education would be maintaining debate's long-term value in terms of your life.
Yeah.
Now, we need to figure out what the presumed framework for a K would be.
That differs though.
Exactly. And it differs based on if it's a discursive K, if it's a topic-specific K, if it's a race-based K, if it's like something like a cap K, if it's a mindset K, right? So that's the first thing you need to isolate when you're weighing against the K, is you need to isolate what their framework is. The next thing you have to isolate is, why is that the framework? Why should that be the end-all, be-all concern of the judge? So this word framework that we're referencing to is popularly referred to as role of the ballot.
Yeah, or role of the judge.
Well, no, I think that role of the judge is a little bit distinct, and let's talk about that distinction. The role of the ballot is, should we properly be able to determine the best debater, or should we should maintain the educational value of debate for the long term, or we should reject racist and homophobic and sexist language that is uttered in the debate space in an effort to keep it more inclusive, right? Things like that. The presumption then is that the role of the judge on fairness is to be an objective adjudicator. The role of the judge on education would be to be a good educator, or to maintain the educational value of the debate space. The role of the judge in K debate then differs depending on the K we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? If we're talking about a K that wants to maintain inclusiveness in the debate space, the role of the judge is somebody who helps maintain inclusiveness.
Yeah, or like prevents exclusion.
Right, or prevents exclusion, exactly. So the first big framework question that is usually very strategic to engage on a K versus theory debate, but that almost never gets engaged, is, what is the judge's purpose?
Okay.
If you win that the judge is only here to resolve this debate objectively, and that's it, that seems to get you a huge leg up on the theory versus K debate.
Sure, yeah.
It doesn't actually win you the weighing, but it makes winning the weighing a lot easier. This is similar to on the video we were talking about with impact framing, paradigm issues. We were talking about how should we talk about the constitutive role of debate, or should we talk about the pragmatic benefits, i.e. on fairness versus education? This is similar to, should we have the judge be an objective adjudicator who is only concerned about who actually won this debate round, or should we have the judge be an empathetic human being who is concerned about making debate a great activity for everyone involved?
Sure.
Right? And so do you see how the difference in how we evaluate that debate can influence who wins theory versus K?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the first thing, is the importance of establishing what the role of the judge is. I think the next thing is, when we're debating between what the role of the judge is, let's say we say the role of the judge is to maintain a non-inclusive debate sphere and to let the children of the activity feel included. And then the other person says the role of the judge is to be an objective adjudicator, right? Now, reasons why we could say they have to be an objective adjudicator. A, they have a contractual obligation. They're being paid to decide who wins and loses the debate round. When people advertise that they're the winner of this debate round, the assumption is that they legitimately won that debate round. Or they, when people say, I won the Glenbrooks tournament, the assumption is that they legitimately won the Glenbrooks tournament, right?
Okay.
So that's the judge's contractual obligation. B could be that, this is the unique constitutive role of judging. This is the difference between coaching and judging and participating, that the participants actively argue for and against the resolution, and the purpose of a judge is to evaluate the winner of that conversation. And you could read like a dictionary definition of the word judge, right? And the C could be like, this is most in line with our common intuitions on the purpose of a judge, right? Like if we have a referee in basketball, we wouldn't say that the referee's purpose is to maintain inclusivity, and so that's the reason why physically disabled people should be like given preference by the judge. Like the judge should not call traveling and double dribbling on physically disabled people, right? We would say that that judge is not there to make the basketball court a safe space for physically disabled people. It's there to ensure that the winner of the basketball game is the one who most fairly scored the most amount of points.
The C-star point makes, I feel like makes people sound a little like, I don't know. That just doesn't sound.
No, so yeah, I definitely understand. It doesn't sound good, but it's not actually sounding bad, right? There's a difference between saying that the
That we don't
judge
give a crap about
doesn't
anything.
care about exclusivity and saying that the judge is not focused on that. That's not their main priority, right? So, like a great example is, let's use the basketball analogy. If one of the basketball players starts cussing out people in the crowd and starts shouting racial slurs,
Sure.
the referee can and does throw that person out.
Right.
Because it's harming the integrity of that game. Right?
Sure.
So, similarly in debate, most judges have in their paradigm, if you are sexist or homophobic or racist, then I will automatically drop you. Right? That's their equivalent of saying, look, like if you do something to threaten the safety of the participants in the debate space, then I won't vote for you. Right? But the difference is that most judges have their own internal line for when that is crossed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the K debate on the role of the ballot tries to make it an external line that can be weighed against.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a very legitimate form of argumentation, and one that I'm glad has gotten acceptance in the last few years and become very popular. We just have to understand what it is.
Sure.
Right? We'll have a session where we talk about weighing K versus theory, and from the perspective of K outweighs. But right now, our perspective is just theory outweighs.
Sure. Yeah.
So those are examples for why the judge might be an objective adjudicator, right? Examples for why the judge might be an empathetic human being who is concerned with the inclusivity of the debate space and making it accessible for all could be arguments such as, we are people before we are debaters, and that the human capital that is cost in debate is not worth the wins and losses, right? Or it could be another argument that's like, this is an activity that is run by adults. Adults have a unique obligation towards children to teach them good values, right? And so your obligation is to ensure that good values are being taught in the debate sphere, and exclusivity is not a good value. Now, these are just examples, right? This is by no means a comprehensive list on either side of this debate. But the bigger picture here that needs to be established, so we've already established the importance of winning what is the role of the judges.
Yeah.
But then we need to have another framework for deciding how we decide what the role of the judge is.
Oh, sure.
So we need a framework to decide the theory versus K debate. Then we need a framework to decide the framework. So in some senses, people love the word meta, and we could accurately claim that this would be a meta framework.
Right.
Right? I personally detest that word. I think it's just like overused and is just not a word I'm a huge fan of. But it doesn't, like, that's just a word that illustrates an explanation.
Sure.
Right? So two frameworks need to be resolved. One is what the role of the judge is, and second, how we decide what the role of the judge is. And both of those framework questions are essential to deciding theory versus K. They help make it really easy to win the line by line on theory outweighs the K.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've probably never engaged in this debate before,
No.
or seen it engaged before. But those are the debates that need to be fleshed out now moving forward. This is the clearest way to have a debate round and help sort of progress the norms and the depth that this activity goes on the K debate.
Wait, so like the arguments that you just made, like Judges have a contractual obligation, and the constitutive role of judging, or answering the question, what is the role of the judge? Right?
Yeah, and then we need to answer the question of how do we decide what the role of the judge is? Like,
Well-
what do we care about more? Do we care about being people over debaters, or do we care about being in line with our contractual obligations? And do we make that decision from a utility perspective, or do we make it from a deontic perspective?
Weighing between the arguments that you just made.
Exactly. That's what I mean by meta framework. So the analogy would be on a fairness versus education theory debate, right? The lower level weighing is that fairness outweighs education because fairness is irreversible. The meta level weighing would be that reversibility is much more important than duration of the education or school funding.
Sure.
And the intellectually disingenuous way to go about this weighing is just talking about strength of link.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
we want to do this impact weighing from the perspective of strength of impact.
In absolute terms.
Exactly.
Sure.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a lot of reasons why theory outweighs decay and why it controls the link. And then I want to see you respond.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to get out your paper and pen. And then let me know once we are good to go.
I'm good.
Okay. So, for people following along at home, I would highly recommend you also flow this and then stop once I'm done reading it and prep for 4 to 5 minutes, give a speech, record your speech, compare it to the one that Kirk gave, then listen to Kirk's speech and my comments on Kirk's speech and incorporate that into your own feedback. All right. Ready, Kirk?
Yeah.
Theory determines which arguments can and can't be read in round. Thus, offense on theory logically precludes case cross applications from decay to take it out. Second theory linked to decay. Abuse prevents me from accurately portraying my discourse or explaining the problems with decay. Theory shows that A, my opponent is silencing me and engaging in oppression. B, the K can't come first because theory questions whether I have access to offense on decay, or K comes first argument. So even if they win their roll of the ballot, you vote on theory. And C, you can't evaluate who's winning decay if it's skewed. Even if your roll of the ballot comes first, I prove that assessing who's better meeting it is flawed. I.e., if you had 10 minutes as opposed to 1 to justify whoever was insert your roll of the ballot, then you'd obviously be ahead. Third, fairness is a prerequisite to any form of discussion. Turns all your K impacts. Galloway 7. According to fairness, when one side excludes the other, it denies the personhood of the other. Backed by research and critical thinking, opposition is necessary because it sharpens thought to reach agreement. Debate compensates for the exigencies of the world by maintaining equity for the sake of the conversation. End quote. This A turns your inclusion argument since I'm excluded from this discussion. If you're unfair, this outweighs your form of exclusion since its effects are tangible to this round instead of abstract. B, this form of debate no links your arguments about problems outside of it since it establishes equality for the sake of conversation. Only fairness matters within this round. Fourth, K's need to check on abuse, otherwise K debaters could become as abusive as possible and always win because their opponent was at a severe disadvantage. This turns your framework at the highest level because the K turns into a tool of oppression without a check against the K itself. Fifth, theory has the largest real-world impact as we actually change norms for the activity, which means that even if he is correct on his pre-fiat framework and the judge should endorse educational norms, you vote on theory first. Six, norms are a prerequisite to argumentation. Good night. There exists intuitively sensible and specifiable constraints to engage in arguments. Arguments shape a consensus on what is justified and appropriate. In a pluralistic culture, tests of justice are uniquely complicated. It is crucial that moral reasoning situate its argumentation in common adherence to agreed upon procedures. Norms include a commitment to fairness. End quote. Outweighs because norms ensure exploration of criticism. Otherwise, we exclude other relevant mindsets. Also indicts the epistemology of the K. We can't access the truth if you cut out roots of criticism. Okay, so take a few minutes of prep time, and let's see how you do.
Can I see you?
Okay, so hopefully you have finished your prep time, given your speech, recorded yourself, and so I want to have you compare what you came up with compared to what you're about to hear.
Before you evaluate fairness versus discourse online, you have to have a framework to evaluate those impacts. My framework is that the role of judge should be an empathetic person who prevents exclusion and the activity. This is because we're people, but for debaters, the loss of human capital outweighs the wins and losses. We should care about our effects on the real world, our discourse that because it's going to last forever. Most of us are not going to stick for an activity for long. On your number one argument, you can definitely respond to unfair arguments empirically proven by other debaters who don't read theory and still respond to unfair arguments. On number two, you say a link charge. You say ace point that you silence me. However, you misunderstand silencing an oppression. And when you silence your questioning assumptions on a substantive level, me preventing you from reading theory is not silence. You can simply engage me on the critical discourse. Cross apply this to Galloway evidence. Also your number four argument on your obese one. You say it's a question I have access. However, even without fairness, I have access to my arguments as proven by my response against number one argument. Your when you say you can't evaluate his. However, it's a question on strength. Link. Obviously, it's not as bad as 10 minutes skew versus 1 minute skew. Even if I cause a little bit of unfairness, you can still weigh the strength of link in my role valid debate versus your theory debate. Your third on Galloway one. This begs the question of what exclusion is. Turn you're excluding thousands of individuals who are harmed by your discourse. I'm preventing that exclusion. And second, non-unique quality community infra by other activities. If you really care about quality, join some other activity on number four. You can weigh the strength of link. That's sufficient to solve. Also, that's answer five on number five. You say it's real world one turn. I'm more real world because I weigh on magnitude abuse. We allow correcting our discourse, so we don't harm individuals in the real world. Also, your discourse will harm so many more in the real world. You're only harming more in the real world. My unfairness only harms you, which means I weigh on scope. Second, it's this is it says group your 5 and 6 argument. Norms are empirically not ace point. It's that norms are contradictory. People make RBR, no RBR arguments all the time. Visa points that norms there are thousands any rounds give me any given topic. Unlikely that any one piece of attention on any specific round on the good night evidence. It says the argumentation is important. I follow that because I give you proper argumentation. You say norms is key to fairness. However, that begs the question why fairness is important.
Okay. I think there's a lot of arguments you could have made that you're missing. So let's go through it. So I think the first argument is the response to the first argument you have is that you can still respond to unfair arguments. I think that is more of a response to the second argument not being made, not the first argument. The first argument is theory determines which arguments can and can't be read and round. Thus, offense on theory logically precludes cross applications from the K to take it out. My first response would be these are all just assertions with no warrants.
Oh, okay.
Right? There's no reason why theory determines which arguments can and cannot be read and round.
Sure.
If I win the K versus theory debate, then I'm winning reasons why arguments that are not theoretically legitimate can still be read in the round.
Okay.
Right? So I would say something like, you presume your conclusion.
Okay.
Right? This argument assumes its conclusion that theory comes first. It only makes sense if theory does come first.
Okay.
Which means evaluate rest of the debate before you evaluate this argument. This is just the impact to the theory versus K debate if he's right.
Sure.
This is not a warrant why he's right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this would be like, if we were to categorize this as a logical fallacy, this argument is the fallacy of assuming your conclusion.
Oh, that's an actual fallacy?
Yeah, for sure. And you hear it all the time in debate. Make sense? Okay. On the number two, that theory link turns to K because abuse prevents you from like accurately portraying discourse. So I think your response that you can still engage on the critical discourse is good, but it can be more powerful, right? You should say there's a difference between structurally being prevented from engaging and substantively not being able to engage, right?
Okay.
So like structural prevention is the 10-minute versus 1 minute example.
Yeah, okay.
In that example, yes, theory does control the internal link into the K.
Sure.
But in a world where we both have 13 minutes of speech time and it's been divided equitably, then no, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Right? It's a question of you can still engage, you just don't want to.
Okay.
So you need to draw the difference between structural abuse and substantive abuse and point out that substantive abuse is at worst case scenario for you, just something that puts the 1AR in a tough position, not something the 1AR can't recover from.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, it's a question of, do we want the 1AR, like, is it okay for the 1AR to have a slightly harder speech, or is it okay for the AF to do whatever bad thing they did via the K?
Fair enough. Yeah.
And that definitely on magnitude seems like the K debate comes out ahead.
Sure.
Make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I think that you don't need to respond to the A, B, and C as much as you need to just group the number 2.
Okay.
Right? And so the argument, the way I would go about it is, your theory linked turns to K argument is partially correct. It's only correct in a world where your 10-minute versus 1-minute example is actually representative of the abuse that's happening. That is an example of structural abuse where the negative had 9 more minutes to talk about the issues at hand than the affirmative debate did. In that instance, yes, you are being silenced and cannot engage in the discussion, but that is not the instance that is happening in this debate round. You are very capable of engaging in this round. You had 4 minutes to engage in the 1AR, and you'll have 3 minutes in the 2AR. You just chose not to. So it's not a question of me preventing you from engaging. It's a question of you deciding that your engagement is something you'd rather not do because you thought that there was a more fair way I could have let you engage. That's a substantive difference. That's at best a minor harm to theory, whereas there's a significant harm that's happening via the K. So if we're comparing the amount of oppression that's happening, you can still engage via the oppression that's happening on you. In fact, many people have engaged this very same K without theory, so that empirically proves you can, but I can't engage whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Then you compare it to yours, right?
Uh-huh.
And by whatever, I mean I can't engage whatever the scenario of the K is.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, prerequisite to any form of discussion, Galloway. So the key part is when one side excludes the other, right? Like, yes, if you excluded them by like punching them in the face or like shouting really loudly, like if every time the AF talked, you were just like really loudly going like blah 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 blah, and just like literally excluding them from participating in the conversation, then yes, right? That would trigger the Galloway card. Galloway would make a ton of sense in that situation.
I think I sort of made the argument, but like, as like that begs the question of what exclusion is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like the you're getting at the argument, but you're not doing it as well as you could have.
Sure.
Right? I think the other thing you need to point out here is that bidirectional theory means that you can read a theory shell against a K and then read a K the very next round. And that's uniquely bad because that proves that you don't get excluded from the activity. That there's a difference between theory being a tool to prevent exclusion and theory being a tool to win rounds.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I think the next thing you need to respond to is definitely the impact on Galloway. Right? There's impact weighing saying it outweighs your form of exclusion since the impacts are tangible to this round instead of abstract.
I should respond to that.
Like, the first response should be this probably links you back into the K. The fact that you think it's abstract indicates that there's been no remorse showed by the 1AR via its actions that it did in the 1AC, right? Like, you can absolutely perceptually kill them here.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Like, the idea that the discursive implications of your AF is abstract illustrate how much knowledge and education needs to be given to you so you can truly understand what you're doing.
Sure, okay.
I think the B point should be that it's not a question of, like, tangible versus abstract. It's a question of magnitude.
Right,
That even if it is abstract, the K impact, if your tangible impact is very minor, the abstract one can theoretically probably outweigh it.
Yeah, sure.
Now, the B point is only fairness matters in this round because it establishes equality for the sake of conversation, right? This is where I think the fairness for who conversation is really, really strategic.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Right? Like, you should say, like, look, you established fairness in one sense, which is theoretically, but you don't establish fairness in another sense, which is preventing oppression.
Oh, sure.
right? Your definition of fairness is narrow-minded. It's in terms of competitive equity. And my point is that there is more to fairness than just competitive equity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the question like a lot of K debaters ask, like fairness.
Yeah, and this is the exact place where it needs to be brought up.
Sure.
And I would probably make that a turn if I were you. Okay. The next argument is that K's need to check on abuse, otherwise K debaters could be as abusive as possible and always win because their opponent was at a severe disadvantage. Right? So the first response should be, even if the K comes first, it doesn't mean there aren't checks on the K, right? Like, your checks on the K are substantively available to you. Like, if the K alt doesn't do anything, then the K becomes a non-unique disag.
Wait, repeat that argument?
Yeah, so the argument is K's need to check on abuse.
Right.
I would say the check on abuse happens via substantive argumentation. Like, if my K alt doesn't solve the problem, then it seems like instead of saying it's theoretically unfair, you can non-unique the K.
But I think the argument that they'll make is like give the example of utopian fiat, that where you abuse your argument to ensure that you access the best K ground. I can't answer that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to think of how we would deal with that. See, the problem for that for me is that I tend to think that K's can be written in a manner that is unfair, i.e. they could do something like utopian fiat and isolate a problem.
Probably begs the question of the strength of link and abuse story.
Right, and it's also probably a question of potential abuse versus real abuse. Whether it applies to this actual round. Right, like if you read a K that it has a conditional floating pick as its alt, that K is probably unfair.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so theoretically, there are probably problems with that K.
Right. Yeah.
And saying K outweighs theory doesn't really make sense in that situation because this argument makes 100% sense now.
Sure. Yeah.
That you need to check on this type of K.
Yeah.
I think the other argument you can point out here is that you can link turn or impact turn. No, I don't think it's an impact turn, but you can turn Ks in terms of genuineness. So you don't need to say theory outweighs the K. You can prove that an unfair K was disingenuous.
Okay, yeah.
So you can use theory to prove that the motive for running the K wasn't preventing whatever oppression they claimed they were going to prevent, but rather to win the round.
That's probably like most debaters.
Yeah, but I think that you can advocate that theory is the tool by which you can prove that.
How is theory the tool?
Because if they ran the K with utopian fiat and there was alternative they could have ran that was non-utopian fiat, and you asked them to defend that in cross-examination, their non-willingness to substantively engage you on the question of the alternative is indicative of the fact that they're trying to just get an easy win.
Okay, sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That they're viewing the suffering as a tool to win as opposed to a legitimate conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, sure.
I think your argumentation on norms is good. I think the other thing you should point out is that if it's about the largest real-world impact, K definitely comes first because we remember how we feel, not how we won or lost.
Okay.
Like, we remember how debate made us feel 20 years from now, not like which trophies we won or lost, or which rounds we won or lost.
Yeah.
That the wins or losses seem important right now in the here and now, but in terms of the real world impact, what's important is the knowledge we gain and the feelings and the emotions we have.
Sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Additionally, I would say this definitely also means K outweighs case because the case impacts back to a policy that will never be passed.
Oh, yeah.
Via signing the ballot.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yeah. That's an injury.
Yeah. Now, I think you can turn the Goodnight analysis, right? Intuitively sensible and specifiable constraints. You should point out that if you're meeting that means there is no theory violation.
What was a Goodnight argument?
There exists intuitively sensible and specifiable constraints to engage an argument, right? Your point should be that those intuitively sensible and specifiable constraints are the speech times and speech order.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this also would function as like terminal defense on the theory shell.
Sure. Yeah.
That as long as you're showing that there is a specifiable constraint on the way that your K is being ran, then you are winning the theory versus K debate.
Sure. Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, did you find this useful?
Yeah.
Cool. I also think the big picture overview you have here, in terms of we should have empathy as a judge, that is fantastic analysis. I think also the argument that like you should make in terms of duration, it should be we remember how we feel, not who was more fair or educational in this one round.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Right? Also, it seems to be a reversibility question that there are future debates in which you can have fair rounds or educational rounds, but this is a unique debate in which you can have a conversation about discursive implications of your rhetoric.
Okay.
So, in your redo, I would encompass all this criticism and give a speech. I think you should be able to do this debate, presuming you're the 2NR going for the K, in no more than 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes.
My time was like 2:10.
Okay, yeah. So I think 2 minutes is probably the upper limit because then you still have to win the line by
Right,
line
yeah.
on the K, and you still probably want to put some line by line on theory. Like you don't want to just put all your eggs in the basket of theory is outweighed by the K.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Did you find this helpful? Cool.